Hello and welcome to Hot Takes, Cold Proofs with me, Nino.
And Atia. And we are here with two lovely guests, Dr. Jen Mayer, Head of School of Human and Social Sciences here at University of West London. And we're welcoming back Professor Phil Cox, Dean of the School of Computing and Engineering at UWL. Welcome both.
Thank you.
I think to kick us off, it'd be good to tell us a little bit about yourself. So, Jen, what's got you into social sciences and got you into academia?
So my background is actually in psychology, which is, depending on who you ask, social sciences or social sciences adjacent. And I got into psychology a bit on a whim when I was studying. I've always been interested in people, but I kind of wasn't sure if it was a direct path for me or not, and came to London to study abroad, not liking cities at all, wouldn't have gotten on the plane had I not already paid the deposit. And within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I think, of being in London and studying in the UK, I realized I learned more about psychology than I had in the whole time I was in the US, doing an arts and sciences degree. And so ended up transferring over here for all of my degrees, falling in love with research, and starting a career in academia. Because, to be honest, when you look at academia in the States, you don't really hear your calling necessarily. But no, ended up working in the UK and very quickly realized that I wanted to be part of the solution. And that's what brought me down a leadership and management route, which I think psychology is quite well suited for as well.
Fantastic.
How about you?
How about you?
Early years very bumpy academically. Didn't really know what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. It was only after a long protracted go at a degree I discovered that actually research was quite cool, and did my PhD, etc. And then settled in, well, if you saw the first episode, into being a chemical engineer. But one of the things we did as a research group there was interact with the psychologists a lot. We were doing a lot of food preference. And what, Nino, you'll recognise the phrase, if you've got knowledge, you're a scientist. Did lots and lots with some of the really big groups in the UK for food psychology, and then suddenly realised that this group of people were incredibly good at what they did. You know, as engineers and scientists, we think we do controlled experiments well. Now we're paddling in the shallow end compared to these guys, and so started working with them. Then eventually moved on and got into academic management, and ended up at UWL with my school.
Brilliant.
3 years. About 3 years you've been with us.
3 years last month.
How about you, Jeff? How long have you been?
Just over 3.5. I think I was here for about 3-4 months before Phil joined, and I stuck around, which says a lot.
We didn't meet for the first 3 or 4 months.
They don't let you leave. I've been here far too long. So in terms of your day-to-day work, how often would you say your schools cross paths, work together, and what are the trends that seem to be bringing them together at the moment?
It's quite an interesting one because you cross paths in many ways when you think about all the different university groups. And I think oftentimes we think that schools have more interaction with one another than they might have, because you assume you sit on a group together, you get to know each other, and you start seeing some cross-pollination. But I think when I first joined, I don't think we had any interaction between our two schools. But we've started to see that steadily pick up around AI, definitely around cybersecurity. And I think particularly once Julie Wall's research center opened up, we're starting to see a lot more interaction. And the early career researchers as well. I think they've been a big piece of why the schools have started coming together.
Yeah, I asked Julie to sort of start talking to you guys. I was reading proposals for Vice Chancellor's scholarships, and people coming up saying, I'm going to do this with AI, I'm going to mimic humans, I'm going to understand how humans work. I'm thinking, you don't understand anything about humans. And it's of computer people that are very, very good at coding, but the discipline doesn't interact with the humans at all. So Julie, as you said, kicked off the interaction, and then it was taken up by the early career people, because that's where the synergy lies. You've got to understand humans to mimic them or interact with them. And you can't do it alone. We can't do it alone at all.
To mention cybersecurity, how does that fit into? Because that's a subject area you wouldn't usually associate with human and social
No,
sciences.
so that is criminology sits within human and social sciences. So it comes from the criminology side, and we have a couple of people in criminology who are more in the securities realm.
Oh, okay. So in terms of that, the sort of the need, because it's something that we kind of were thinking about in terms of thinking about the episode today, is like, how do these two disparate areas, the requirement for them to cross over becomes become like more important as time has gone on almost. I mean, how do you see that, let's say compared to, let's say, 20 years ago, how are things more that cross-pollination happening in a way more than, let's say, did when maybe we were working in silos more in the past? Is that
I think one of the drivers is Jen and I talk. And that is, and from when we first sort of met almost, because I don't think either of us knew much about each other's school at all when we first started, starting around the same time. And there are obvious questions going in both directions. And that made it possible. 20 years ago, when I was working 20 years ago, I would never have known you. You'd have been half a mile away from me across the campus. This couldn't happen. And that's probably one of the strengths of UWL. We are pushed together quite a lot.
So, building on that, when does it make the biggest difference for a social scientist to be involved in a technology and engineering project and vice versa? And does that moment come early enough, do you think?
I don't think it does come early enough, and I think it is all of the time and throughout. And I would argue, oftentimes we look at it as social sciences or psychology, and it's really interesting if you look at it from the term behavioral science more so than anything else, and looking at it in terms of understanding behavior and wanting to often instigate behavior change. And anything that you're doing where you want to change a behavior or understand why somebody's using something, whether it be a piece of software, whether it be something physical in the environment, you need to understand why it's being used the way that it is. And most importantly, you might develop something that is wonderful and will change the world. If you can't get people on board with it, how are you ever going to get it adopted into daily life? And really utilized in a way that is friendly to your everyday users, which tends to not be the people who are creating the technology, and to be honest, aren't even the academics who are talking about it. So how do we kind of bridge that gap? And I think at every different stage along the way, it's quite helpful. And one way to look at it, I was talking to somebody recently about looking at what's happened with social media usage and what we know now about the impact that it's having on children and teenagers. And no one really took that into account as it was being developed, what those both positive and negative effects might be. And then you end up in a position where it is so ingrained into everyday life that you start putting up boundaries around it, to start creating social norms around how much is an acceptable amount of use, when is acceptable. It's really hard to do that after the fact.
it seems to be things that come, sorry,
no, of
things that come further down the line. That's the technology is, we've got this amazing, they can do this, and then the thought, what's the impact of this, isn't necessarily thought of at that point always, I guess, but
Radio 4 this morning, I was driving down, we're talking about curtailing news for under 16-year-olds. And all the journalists were saying that no one alive knows how the algorithms now work. Pretty sure they do, because they're an algorithm. They've got to be written somehow. What they churn out, you might not expect. But again, they were written probably in isolation and without talking what will the effects be. And so and now we're being reactive to these things, not proactive to these things.
Or you think about, it's really important for us as a society to be looking at how we can adopt new technologies, how we can adopt them in a way that make us more efficient. So you take what happened years ago with TfL and being able to tap in when you board the public transit. And of course, the knock on of that is you don't need ticket sales anymore and ticket takers anymore. But we're moving forward with that. And had, again, we done that human piece of work at the beginning and talked about, well, this is going to change the demand in that area. And this is how we're going to retrain people who are currently working in this area. This is how we're going to ensure job security. You then have everybody, including the unions, on board with the adoption of this new technology rather than trying to resist it.
Thank you. So we can conclude that we're still in that space where we develop technology for a problem and then look at all the other problem that is caused and then invite our human and social scientists to come and help. We're still there then. Yes.
But I think we are, even you take the social sciences end of it, we often want to take a look at what people are going to think about something or how they might adopt a new behavior. And we're not also going out to you guys and saying, if you build this into the technology, or have you thought about how we want to, you look at all of the apps now, they're quite helpful in terms of cognitive behavioral therapy and how we can adopt that. We also see resistance on our end from psychology about not wanting to pull the human element out of it and not being willing to admit that no matter how much we resist it, this technology is going to take over, or there are ways in which it could be helpful.
Thank you. Yeah. So that was the sort of question to you as well. Where do you think that technology can impact?
Well, there's a couple of big failures, because again, my research area long ago for was food. There's a very, very famous example in food engineering called the Alestra story. Well, I said this last time, in which a well-known food manufacturer, name no names, but they're up north, put in a new product into tubes that come, crisps that come in a tube, that run with singles. And Alestra, everyone knows this story, was a non-digestible fat, so you could eat the crisp without having to worry about the fat content. Absolutely brilliant. It was seen as being fantastically innovative in trying to combat obesity because it just reduced the calorific values. But what they didn't realize was that the human condition took it as, well, I can eat more then. And so instead of having a tube, because once it's open, you've got to eat them all.
There's a
Don't
fault.
have-
What's your fault?
Yeah. But it's also true. Yeah. Why they put the plastic cap on, I don't know, because it never gets used. You throw it. But people just shoot more and more and more, which resulted in a phenomenon known as anal leakage, because the undigested fat had to go somewhere and come out somewhere. And so it was taken off the market because people didn't understand. Another big Anglo-Dutch company produced a zero fat spread. So instead of having butter, you had something that tasted, felt like butter. So Flora has a bit in it. This went zero fat. Absolutely great. Has taken it off the market because there was complaints because people were trying to fry with it. There's zero fat. Do you not get the fat that you're frying? So these things are defeated by the human condition not keeping up with the technology. And those are quite simple examples. You eat it. But imagine when you've got something as powerful as AI-driven algorithm to what you want to see 5 hours a day, then it becomes worrying, that becomes challenging. What are we missing currently? What will be the anal leakage that comes out of Facebook next?
No, I was going to say something I won't say.
I'll save it for
I think happy 2016, but then we'll gloss over that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Do you think there's a perception that engineers want clear, testable answers and human and social scientists are more comfortable with the ambiguity and interpretation? And is it actually a barrier when you want to work together, those misconceptions, if they exist? Sorry, I didn't want to frame. I actually did, but didn't mean to.
That's a tricky one. I'm not sure. If you'd asked me to categorize it, I wouldn't have categorized it in that way with each
How
of
would
those
you-
groups.
Yes.
And I think it actually comes down to more people's understanding of the methodology that they're working within and their comfort and confidence with how much we can push the boundaries of that and how much we can push into uncertainty. I feel like oftentimes with psychology, you're more used to having this very, very niche area that you've looked at and understanding that the population that you're studying impacts how much you can generalize it. And so people will become very good in psychology at saying, well, we don't know the generalizability of this. We don't know the extent to which this will be true in adults, in males, in females, in people that start living on Mars, and you put all of these caveats around it. And so in that way, it almost shows a higher amount of rigidity, I would say, in those groups. But also the ability to say, well, let's take a look and test how this might work in a different population. Um, Engineers, really, I don't know much about where they're coming from on this.
We should be good at it because we understand noise.
Mm.
That's one thing that engineers and scientists are good at, is understanding what noise is in data. So actually something with a normal distribution coming out from a study, we should be able to handle quite comfortably. And mathematicians help us understand these things. I think at that point, we should be up for the challenge. My issue is, though, that finding that midpoint within the noise is basically what AI does on multiple axes. And my worry with AI is it is giving us the bland, that we are going to miss the human condition with AI because you're not taking the interesting, the unique in particular will not be seen by AI. And so in terms of worries of the engineers making things that will replace us in terms of the creatives, yeah, you'll get the odd video of someone pretending to a deep fake, for instance, but actually truly creative, I don't think it can find it. And that's where the human condition comes back in, and the proper description of the human condition comes back in.
Well, then you also have to look at the variability in the human condition. So my area of expertise was in autism spectrum disorders or neurodevelopmental disorders. And one of the difficulties that you have is you are looking at a very heterogeneous group of individuals. And the more you start saying, well, we're going to remove outliers from this group, which is a very common way in statistical analyses, you start removing those outliers and you're removing the heterogeneity that you are trying to study. And I think the more you're reverting to what is that norm in the middle of the noise, you're actually not capturing the broadness that we see within the human condition.
I was going to be worrying about, as we go down the AI path, are people interacting? If you are outside that normal distribution, the outliers, it's not going to see you. It's really not going to give you what you need, require. And that can have serious implications. If you start talking to chatbots and making big decisions about whether if it's something simple and money, but if it's complex such as health or life decisions, and this technology is not recognizing you process things differently, that's going to be a huge problem for some.
Have you come across some issues like this? Because I remember reading that you work a lot with special needs adults or young adults. And I understand that AI is trained on a very particular small amount of a sample size of people who are quite general in terms of their understandings of the world. Has that ever happened that something's been developed but doesn't really take into account maybe all the users and
Yeah, I mean, in terms of AI, it's not something I've looked into, but I think you see that across the board with, as you say, almost everything that's been developed is being developed for what you might call a typical user. And even if you want to say we're going to develop a piece of technology for a typical user with autism, there's no such thing as a typical user with autism either. And I think that's where you start seeing some difficulties. But it's, again, it's how you train it. It's how you train people to use these various technologies. And I think there are benefits to AI, and that you can be very literal in what you put into AI, and you will often get something very literal back. And so in some ways that can be quite helpful. But you need to understand, and I think this is where lots of people, our own students, our own staff, your everyday user, don't understand that if you just slightly tweak the prompt that you put in, you get something very different, or don't understand the data that AI's been trained on. So you take psychology that we already know is very westernized, is historically fairly male dominated, and that is what you're starting with. And AI amplifies that. So you also have to understand a little bit more about where the history of the material that's going into it that is producing that answer. And I gave a talk in Sri Lanka a couple weeks ago on AI and psychology and said, again, this is one of the things you really need to be aware of, is you're going to see more of the westernized approach echoing back at you.
So actually, that potentially that almost creates an issue that maybe wasn't there before. The fact that there's this kind of this inherent bias that's spreading to places where perhaps it wasn't before because of things you mentioned. So
But I think it typifies the relationship between the two schools. Last week I was at a mini conference, mini presentation organised by MIT looking at AI and use of AI. And the example they gave was you put in 2 random keywords into ChatGPT, but went to the 3 or 4 levels down in terms of what it would search for. Set it running. 20 minutes later, there's a précis, there's a set of slides, there's a set of graphs in terms of distributions across things. There was just a bundle of stuff it had made in 20 minutes based on hockey and accounting with the 2 keywords we'd use. No direct relationship at all. 20 minutes, but even a whole set of slides for a 15-minute presentation. Unless you've got the emotional intelligence and maturity to understand it's nonsense, what are we going to do? As educators, we'll now get students who can turn up having just put in keywords, bang, there's your presentation. So presentations are no longer immune from they were. If you wanted to test a student's understanding, tell me about it, give me a presentation. That's out the window now. And it's just, that's really worrying that we as educators now need to understand the motivations about why you want to get this explained to you by a machine, but also how to make sure that you understand what they've told you. That's probably where our education is going.
I think that goes back to the human side of it. It's not that we shouldn't be using AI. I think it's helping people understand how and when. When are the best test cases for it? How would you go about developing a prompt? Where should AI sit? Almost you were asking, where should social sciences sit within the research design of somebody from engineering? Where should AI sit in the project that you're working on? Is it there at the beginning? Is it there throughout? And how are you using it as another voice in the room? Is it creating the initial first draft that you are then tweaking? Are you writing that first draft and it's tweaking it? How do you do that interaction? And then again, creating what are the social norms around that? When is it acceptable? When is it not acceptable?
And how does that, thinking about in terms of how we also assessment and presentation, one thing, but even how we teach and the idea of us as academics producing PowerPoints and so on seems, you almost, even if we've done it ourselves, a student's going to be sitting there thinking, have they done that themselves, or has somebody else, something else done that for them? And we're almost kind of reverting to more base level delivery and chalk and talk, and even with regards to, in some areas confusing, it's for in-class tests, literally writing out code by hand, because that's the only way to ensure that there's no external influencing along the line.
Do you actually need to be there? I was messing around with avatars last week, and I record myself for a minute, give it some text, and it looks like me, even stumbling on things and pausing occasionally, move my hands around too much. You just give it text and does it, and it looks and sounds like me. So if I don't want to do my lecture, do I just type in my notes and have the prompts with the slides on and send it out as a pre-recorded lecture? I tried it with students on Saturday, but it wouldn't save. It was just slightly too long, and I'd run out of space on my free account, just to see if they'd notice if it wasn't me or not.
It's quite scary. So final question: what's one thing either UWL or maybe universities in general could do that would be modest but real and tangible, that would help make collaboration in terms of teaching and learning research easier between your schools or any school of engineering and female social sciences?
You can go first.
Oh, of course I can. Of course I can.
Hashtag diplomatic, be diplomatic. I know, don't worry. We're in a safe space here, guys. It's good.
It's such a big challenge because really, I think it comes from natural interaction. And it's natural interaction on topics that you, when you're limited on time, it's the ones that you normally wouldn't go to. Because I think what we see is people, when people are limited on time, they're going to less optional things that they can engage in. So going to talks or, going to a conference that we have, grabbing lunch with people, often over the lunch, you're answering your emails. So, when you have that interaction, and then you're also limiting it to the topics that are most relevant to what you do. And actually, what I try to say to people is I learn the most usually from the talks that I didn't want to go to. Um, because I'm not expecting anything and you learn something new.
Oh,
It's a topic you don't know anything about. And I'm surprised, but I'm also surprised that I'm surprised every time I see further collaborations between our two schools, because they're often in ways we wouldn't have expected to. They're not things that we would have picked up a year or two ago. And sometimes it is even it has nothing to do with two people's research interest if you were to just read their profile. It's they're having a conversation about what they're interested in. You guys were talking before the podcast, what you were listening to over the weekend. Things like that might spark an idea. Um, so I'm not really giving you an answer to it because I think I think it's a huge challenge. It's how you continue to support and encourage those interactions. And I think UWL does a great job at encouraging those interactions. But it's oftentimes it's the same with the students who aren't always engaged in the course, who could benefit quite a bit from it. If we could get even more of that, I think there is loads of work we would see between the two schools. The non-answer is always a good answer.
Yeah, I'm with you with that one. I try and get to everything in terms of you never know what. Take away one thing you didn't know before you saw. My answer is going to be a lot shorter. My answer is going to be cake. There should be a cake budget. Because sitting people together with a cup of tea and a slice of cake is where you start to get the collaborations. Like you start talking, you start interacting, you find the people you can and do want to work with, and you start to understand them a bit better. Talking via email and formal presentation takes you so far. But unless you get on with that person, you can spend 6 hours in a room writing a grant application together and not stab each other in the head before you got 2 hours in is quite important because you've got to do it. Then you've got to carry on working for, if you get a 3-year grant, you've got to carry on working with that person closely for 3 years. So getting to know them informally, that you can work with them, want to work with them, and then take forward where the mutual ideas come from. I know it's a flippant answer. I do like cake though. But it's next one will cake.
Oh, so you can invite me back. I will.
I am the cake baker, so I know I will now be back here in a couple weeks' time.
You make lovely cakes and bring them on to some of the meetings, and invariably at the end of the meeting you spend 2 minutes chatting to someone you didn't really know, sharing a piece of cake. It works. I never find because I'm bigger than the rest, so it's
So I think we need to rename the podcast Hot Cakes Come Proofs.
We can do that.
We can do that.
We can do that. I will give you one other answer before we wrap up, which is I think in lieu of being able to constantly have that free-flowing interaction, it's about having your point people. So I have 2 or 3 members of staff in my school that I call my matchmakers. They know a fair amount about what everybody does. And so if for example, you guys ever had an idea come out of your school and said, we need somebody from the social sciences, but we don't know who you have, I would say, call one of these 3 people. Spend 5 minutes telling them about your project and they will find someone for you. And I think it's the more we can at least have those matchmakers in each school that can help pair people up. Because oftentimes that's the barrier. You don't know who to contact.
I'm going to steal that idea immediately. That's really full. That's a really good idea.
So less committees, more cakes.
there you go. We got that in there.
I do think
on that bombshell.
Before we finish, I do think that's quite important because we are thrown together, we're pushed together, and the pressures that we have, those social times together, we take the same just before we started. If you're in and you sat next to the person you work with and you talk to them, things can happen. You should get to know the people around you. And actually finding time and space for that in a university week is really hard.
It is a hard thing to do. And I think it's also, sorry, I'm answering my own question, but I mean, your question. But I feel like if I had the space, I would design a whole university around one subject. For example, because I'm doing water resources, it would be water resources. Then I would have a school of psychology, a school of economics, a school of engineering that would all dedicated to that one thing. And that would have this collaboration inherent in it. But we don't have it. So we're working from the end, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, cake, definitely.
Cake, yeah.
Cake's the
Well,
answer.
that's all I'm thinking about now.
Wonderful. Thank you both.
Thank you
This
so
is
much
really
for
lovely
being
we're
with us.
having you here.
Fantastic.
Battenberg, brilliant.
Thank you. And we're done.
And we're done.
And we will have cake next time. Invite me again, and there will, and like me again, there will be cake.
We will. We'll definitely. have you
Battenberg.
both.
Well, that's a Battenberg. I like carrot cake on the carrot.